welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that can talk to a diverse set of topics, and today is no different. We're excited to have Tom Jackobs with us today. He is the Impact Pilot. To say Tom has been few things in his 30 years of being an entrepreneur is an understatement. He has definitely had more failures than successes, but wouldn't have it any other way. He sold his fitness business, which he owned for 9 years, to become the Impact Pilot, helping entrepreneurs generate more income through better sales strategy and using stories to sell. Tom, thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us today.
Roy, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. First off, before we get too far, I got a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts running through my mind. But tell us a little bit about your journey. Kind of how you got here, and through. How did you discover storytelling, and what kind of an impact that it can have on our sales process.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Good lead in as well.
See, I'm gonna let you tell us a good story to impact this.
Oh yeah. No, I'll give you a couple good stories here. I started my entrepreneurial journey when I was 16 years old, and not the typical lemonade stand that most most kids, and not dealing drugs either. But I was actually a mobile DJ, and I also had a string quartet. So I played violin.
Okay.
And so a couple other my orchestra buddies from high school would rent ourselves out for weddings and things like that, and Christmas parties and stuff and play. And then I would DJ homecomings, bar mitzvahs, and weddings as well. And I remember this, and it was just in my head just how important sales became at that point. But I kind of lost that feeling, I guess, or the skill set after a while. But I would go through the Sunday paper when there was a paper and look at all the engagement announcements.
Okay.
I would write down all of the brides to be, all the ladies that got engaged. And then I would look them up in the white pages.
Yeah, you're dating yourself there for sure.
And get their address. This is when the phone number, address was all public information.
Yeah.
And then I'd send them a letter with a call to action and a demo tape. And I didn't realize I was doing direct response marketing and sales. And this one time, this lady calls up and she wants to do a consultation. And so I go and I do the kind of, what kind of music do you want? Just go through the whole intake process. And she was like, oh, well, what school do you go to? And I was like, oh, I go to Northmont. And she was like, I haven't heard of that college. And I was like, no, it's high school.
Oh, God.
And she's like, and it was after she gave me the check, the deposit too. So, and then she's like, you're at high school? I said, yeah, I'm at high school. And actually my mom's waiting in the car to take me home. So can we wrap this up? Yeah. So that's, and at that point, and in telling that story, now it's relating to what, kind of everybody's journey. At some point you start somewhere. Right. And, fast forward, I don't know, about 20 years from that moment, I started my fitness business. And I was in corporate work for 10 years. I always had a side hustle, so I always had that entrepreneurial kind of bug. But finally, the fitness center was my one entrepreneurial journey, or that up until that point where I had no safety net. So no day job or anything like that. So I burned the bridges and went all in. And I thought, in corporate America, I was a mid-level manager, making good money, managing millions of dollars of freight. And I thought, if I could do that, I could certainly run a small business. Yeah. And within 6 months, I was broke.
Oh, wow.
I was, financially broke, mentally, physically. It's just really took a toll on my life. And I'd bought an existing facility, dumped out my entire 401k after 10 years of working in oil and gas. So you can imagine what that might have looked like.
Right.
And all the Apple stock I had in 19 or in 2006, which again, shoot me.
Yeah, right.
And it was with 6 months in, and I was looking at I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, and I was looking at my computer screens, and I was looking at my bank account, and just tears started streaming down my face. And here I was 40 years old at the time, and I was like, what the heck am I doing? And I was looking at my bank account, and rent and payroll, this was Sunday, rent and payroll were due on Friday. And anybody that's been in business, that employees like to get paid.
Right.
And landlords love to get paid. And I was like, am I going to have to shut down my business? And I had to make the hardest phone call of my life. I had to call Dad for money at 40 years old.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody's done that before, but it is an extremely humbling experience.
Yeah.
And I'm on the phone with Dad, and love my parents. They're awesome and very supportive. They've never worked for themselves. I mean, my mom's done some consulting work, but never like had a business. And so he's trying to help me. And I'm like, well, son, have you tried Facebook ads? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
You didn't see that. But it was just kind of trying to help. And I was like, Dad, look, I know what I need. It's $10,000 and I need it by Friday. Can you wire that, or like, how does that work?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, look, son, I'll go ahead and loan you the money. And the emphasis there was on loan.
Right.
Because it came with a 12% interest rate. And I had to mortgage my house with him, with my father.
Oh, wow.
I was like, wait a second. I thought you weren't very entrepreneurial. This is not bad, man. 12% interest. That's good. That's
Right.
good.
Right.
Like, well, I'll give you 6 month interest free. The first 6 months. And at that moment, I was like, it was definitely the low point of my entrepreneurial journey. And I was like, okay. So I obviously paid rent, I paid my employees, but I also took some of that money and I invested in learning. Because at that moment, I realized I didn't know everything that needed to be done in business. I didn't know sales. Sales was one thing that just like completely went away from me. And I invested in a sales program, and it completely transformed my business. And I was able to pay my dad off in 3 months.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Completely turned it around. The first year of business, even with that first 6 months of being a complete disaster, I squeezed out about $100,000 in gross revenue. In the second year, I did just shy of 500,000. And it was all because I learned how to sell, but more importantly, how to sell with story. And it's not just my own story, but stories of clients and things like that. And that's why, like, I got really passionate about selling with story, doing presentations on stage to build a business. It just became kind of that thing that I did, and over the years, it's just grown and grown and grown. So now I teach people how to sell from stage, how to create those presentations, how to bring in their own personal story.
Yeah.
So one is kind of infotaining.
Yeah.
and it's not just like a chronological story that bores people to tears, but rather moves them to tears oftentimes. And then relate that personal story back to whatever they're selling so that they ultimately sell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a couple things. It sounds like that. I've got limited knowledge, so I'll place these more as questions and statements. But I think we need to be relatable. People tend to buy from people that they like or people that they maybe see themselves in a little bit. So if we could take these personal stories, I think that it probably goes a lot further than me saying, well, I used to know Joe, lived down the street from me, and here's Joe's story. Sometimes I'm sure that's helpful and appropriate, but when we get the chance to tie our story into it, it's probably exponential.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people that I work with, and I was this way as well. Why would I tell my story? It's not about me, it's about my client. So yeah, it is about your client. Your client needs to relate to you.
Right.
And we need to find a story. And it doesn't have to be a tragedy. You don't have to, be in a car accident, near life death experience or anything like that. But everybody has a journey and struggles along the way. And also it doesn't even need to be struggles. It could be like one of the most joyous occasions of your life. I have a couple stories about, moments in my life that were just super, super amazing. And sometimes I drop those stories in as well as a way of inspiring others.
Yeah, because there used to be an old theory too that people bought on emotion and justified that with logic, and so trying,
Absolutely.
I guess,
Yep.
again, as a question, part of what we want to do is try to get that emotional hook in
Absolutely.
to not be relatable, but also to start building a little bit of rapport.
Absolutely. That's not just a theory. That's the reality.
Yeah.
People do buy on emotion, and then back it up with logic.
Right. So, what are some good elements? I mean, I'm a non-writer writer. I mean, I love to write. I wish I was better at it. So, what are some good components of the storytelling? Whether we're writing, whether we're up on stage, or sitting down across the desk from somebody in a sales presentation.
Yeah, great question. So I use the hero's journey framework.
Okay.
So it's kind of public domain theory, and every good, and put the emphasis on good,
Yeah.
Hollywood movie is goes back to the hero's journey, and I break it down into just a pretty simple framework. The first thing that you need to do is start it off with what I call an impact statement. So it's just a one or two sentence intro that hooks the audience. So you kind of start it off with a bang. When I tell the fitness center story, I always start with, I was sitting at my desk on a Sunday afternoon, looking at my computer, and tears started streaming down my face. Automatically, with that, it's a hook because people are like, "That's odd. What's going on?" And then you can go back in time and what led up to that moment, and then how you resolve that moment. And then within that, you have people that help you, and then, or people, things, or thoughts that help you, and then people, things, or thoughts that hurt you.
Okay.
And create that push and pull that we often go through.
Yeah.
And that's the structure. And we go through that. And whether you're writing or speaking, the story structure is still the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing, it humanizes us, because if I'm in the audience, and I think we all do, we never want to admit that we're struggling or that we failed. We keep that to a minimum to our close family. But I guess this kind of opens that up to say, oh, I empathize with you. I know exactly how you feel because I've been there, and vice versa. You're telling the audience that I can empathize with you. I know exactly how you may be feeling.
Yep. Exactly. And again, people buy from those that they know, like, and trust.
Right.
And if they can relate to you, and this is what gets me, current day, kind of the Instagram influencers, and just people give out their sizzle reel all day long, 7 days a week, and nobody sees kind of the other reel of life, and what they've gone through to achieve what they have, even if they even have achieved anything. Some of the Instagram people,
Right.
but it's the old saying, it takes 10 years to be an overnight success,
Right.
right? We don't see the struggles a lot of time. And I think it does a disservice to people just starting out in business or in life and wanting to achieve something if they don't understand what the struggle is and how to avoid it.
Right. Right. Yeah, and kind of take a sidebar there for a minute about the internet, social media. It's awesome, and there's so much good to it. I don't want to be negative Nelly, but I think as a beginning entrepreneur, as somebody that may be struggling, we look on there and somebody just got the new car. They're standing in front of this yacht, and like you said, we don't even know if they were even within 10 miles of that yacht. It could have been photoshopped and dropped right in there, but
Right.
we don't talk about, or we don't understand. On the flip side of that, it's like, who's Tom? He's all over the place now. I mean, this guy just came on overnight. Nobody realizes that, yeah, Tom has been working hard, for 10 years or more building this. And the other good, I think it's a meme of like an iceberg, where
Oh, yeah.
90% of it is below the surface. All we see is a small, 10% at the top. So I think we always have to be careful of comparing ourselves and judging ourselves. And it's hard, but I think the, kind of a new mantra is like, stay in your own lane, run your own race. You'll be much better off by not getting hung up in all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, when we're doing a presentation in front of an audience, and it could be sales. I mean, sometimes we have a tablet or a computer we get to use as a prop, but more thinking about when we're on that stage. So many people get so nervous, like, oh, even if it's their story, it's still nerve wracking to talk to other people about that. So, what are some tips to, number one, make sure we got this thing put together correctly, but number two, to just take a deep breath, relax, and just tell our story?
Yeah, yeah. I've seen some train wrecks,
Yeah.
and I've been a train wreck.
Yeah.
But yeah. The first step is, and this may seem counterintuitive, but I actually have my clients write out their entire story longhand or on the computer, but written word for word.
Yeah.
So then we can really wordsmith it to make sure that we're using like words that are going to have an impact with the audience and with them. And so we go through the whole process, and then find the details, because that's where you create the imagery in people's mind.
Yeah.
I could say, I was driving my car to the gym, and I don't know what type of cars popped into your head.
Yeah. I guess mine, Nissan.
Okay.
Just think,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And everybody's going to have a different car in their head.
Right.
But if you want to bring them into your story, then you need to tell them what car you were driving.
Okay.
So it's like the little things in the
Right.
detail.
Right.
Right. So, I had one client that said, I was sitting in my gray, seen better days, 1985 BMW in the parking lot. And then goes on with her story. And now you're there in the parking lot in a gray, beat up BMW.
Right.
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 Yeah. So, so we go through it and just kind of longhand write that out and practice it word for word, and just go through it multiple times, because that's where you get the confidence.
Yeah.
Is just doing the rehearsal and going through over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And then once you're up on stage, and that's where I have this called the 3P process. So presentation to performance for more profits. So then the performance part is, where do you stand on stage when you're in front of people? How do you just move intentionally? Because a lot of speakers, it's like, a tennis match, right? You're just pacing back and forth.
Right.
And there's no reason for them to move on stage, and it's really annoying. And it actually takes away from the story itself.
Yeah.
Or they're stuck behind a podium reading. And again, that's a big no
Yeah.
To do. So, but that comes with practice, and that's there's nothing that will get by with with just winging it.
Yeah.
Right? You have to practice. You have to practice, and that's going to take the nerves away as well.
Yeah.
You're going to be pretty confident, and it's your story, so you better not forget it.
Right. Yeah, and I think and that's a great point about the details because it's something a lot of us wouldn't even think about. It's like, yeah, I drove my car, but I think that really puts us in that car to where you can visualize either you're in that situation and like, yeah, I get that, or I've been there before. I remember that, my old gray car. It really ties that together.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the whole point, is to bring the audience into the story with you.
Yeah.
And there was a study done by a Princeton University professor where they did a fMRI, so a functional MRI machine. That's where they do the magnetic stuff, and they did a brain scan while on I think it was 3 people. One was the storyteller, and 2 were the receivers or the listeners of the story. And while they were telling the story, the same areas of the brain were lighting up in the receivers of the story as with the teller of the story.
Interesting.
So there becomes this neuro connection between the teller and the receiver of the story. And it's so powerful.
Yeah. So what about, I hate to say props, but we have PowerPoint, we have with the technology today, it's easier. I was telling somebody the other day, like I was actually trying to explain to them what an overhead projector was with, with those little clear things you put up there and wrote on. So I said, we've come a long way because there was so much wrong with those, but it's all we had. But anyway, today we've got so much access to technology. But it can be a deterrent if we don't use it correctly or we use too much, too little. And there's also other things, and I know this is probably the longest question ever, but the other thing is using visuals now instead of just words. Basically what you were saying. Sometimes, we say, yeah, I know better. I don't want to stand at a podium and read this thing. But sometimes what we do is we have it written on the projector behind us and we're just reading it, looking the other direction. We've memorized it where we're still reading off our slides. So tell us a little bit about, how the length, the props we may want to use, and then also visuals versus text.
Yeah. And it's the same for webinars as well as live presentations as well. So webinars, you can get away with a little bit more text, but most people are visual. Right. So having a visual representation of what you're talking about is going to go a lot further than having text. And as much as people love to think that they multitask, people do not multitask.
Right.
They're either reading the text on the screen or they're listening to you.
Right.
And it's much better to have them listen to you than to have them reading text.
Yeah.
So you want to minimize the text as much as possible. If you can have a not really a teleprompter, but a prompt in front of you, like the screen of what's going on behind you.
Yeah.
So a small screen in front that shows what's on the screen, that goes a long way as well. I think they call those confidence projectors that are up in the front of the stage, and that way you never have to turn around to see what's on the slide deck. And that, by the way, slide deck, the term slide deck, that came from creating all those slides on plastic because it became a deck, right?
Yeah.
And onto the overhead.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Take you back there, Roy.
Thanks.
Yeah. But yeah, visual imagery, whether it's graphics or pictures, but less is more. When you're doing the telling of the story, and then when you're doing the teaching as well, you just want to have just like really simple bullet points.
Know your technology, and I'm going to throw myself under the bus here and say that this has been it's been a few years ago, so it wasn't yesterday, thank goodness. But I was good with PowerPoint and computer. I knew what was going on. So I was doing some webinars, and for some reason at this point I was in a place where I had my external monitor hooked up. And what happens if you've done this is when you power that PowerPoint up, when you have an external monitor, your slide deck goes to the external monitor, and you're left with that, the thing that you were talking about, kind of your guide on your computer. And so here I am trying to do a webinar, and all they're seeing is this thing that's on my computer. So I think so.
With your notes.
Yeah, my notes. So basically, it's like, we, even though we are good with stuff, we still need to kind of do a few run throughs, make sure everything is set up the same, and then also checking out a room if we're going to a room, because there's nothing worse than showing up 15, 30 minutes early, and there's no screen in this room, there's no projector, there's no cord. I mean, there's a million things that can go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. And I spent 3 years kind of traveling around the world doing presentations for a marketing company that sold an educational program.
Yeah.
And I had this big Pelican case that had the projector, all the learning materials, everything that we would hand out to the crowd. And generally we'd have like 20, 30 people in the audience. And I flew up to Toronto, and I get I'm waiting for the bags, and my Pelican case didn't come off the plane.
Oh my gosh.
Nor did my suitcase with my suit and all that would be wearing. I just had what was on my back.
Yeah.
And I'm working with the airline to try, like, where is it? How's it going to get delivered? All that. Is it going to be delivered by 8:00 in the morning? So I go there to the hotel, and I'm like, okay, where's your printer? where's your business center? I need to print. But I tell you what, that was one of the best presentations that I ever gave, without any material, without any projector, and I closed more than half the room on the program. Yeah. Because I think they empathized with the fact that I didn't have any materials for that.
Well, and I empathize on the luggage, because it wasn't quite that bad, but I've been back in the old days, if something went bad, if you're on an overnight or a fly in, fly out, you were just stuck, because it seems like the world's open 24 hours a day now. But you go somewhere and you run a shirt, and it's just like you have to kind of walk in with your hand over the spot or whatever's wrong. And it was kind of cool the very first time when that happened. Had something got on it at dinner one night. I was actually able to go to a 24-hour Walmart, and it wasn't the best of shirts, but at least it was clean, and be able to go out and replace that. But things have become much better over the years, that for people that travel and not just being stuck and not having any access to replace or get something like that. So yeah, that kind of takes me back to the being embarrassed to have to stand up in front of people with a big old like a
barbecue stain.
Yeah, I was thinking like a red sauce with Italian meatballs, where there's a big old dribble down your shirt. But
Nice. Yeah. But that's the moral of that is you always want to get in early. Always check the room out, make sure that the AV's working. Yeah. Like if I'm doing a presentation and if I'm not the organizer of the event, I will always go the day before and just kind of check the room out. I call it marking the room. So I'll just like walk around the room and just kind of get the feeling of like, how much do I have to project? And, what type of AV am I going to have as a headset, as a lav mic, and just kind of play, right? And you have the time, so you're not rushed.
Yeah, and making sure even like a projector or the screen is big enough, because I've been in those situations where it's, they give you a screen or something that's about as big as your laptop, and the people in the front row can't even see what you're doing. So it gives you an opportunity to make some changes to adapt, if you can either find what you need or change your presentation to, fit what you've got.
Yeah, exactly.
So a couple things I wanted to talk about is more, let's take more of an intimate setting where either in somebody's home, giving them a sales presentation, typically the salesman and maybe husband and wife, or even at the office, somebody sitting across from you, where it's a smaller group. How is that different than playing to the larger room? What are some
Yeah.
adjustments?
So yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is the dynamics are switched now in terms of who's speaking. So when you're in a sales situation, a one-on-one or one-on-two sales situation, the prospect needs to be doing the talking, 80% of the time, and you need to be asking questions. So that's all the salesperson should be doing, is asking questions. And then when it comes to the presentation of the solution, that's when the story can come in.
Yeah.
And it can be either, your own personal journey through why you started the business in the first place and why you want to help them, or it could be a success story from somebody that you've helped. So you can pull in a client testimonial as well.
Okay.
And when I was doing the fitness business, I always had like 6 different testimonials, their picture and kind of their story.
Yeah.
And while I wouldn't go through every single one of them, but I would pick one of the people, the testimonials that I had, that was most like my prospect. So if I had a 45-year-old woman, had 2 kids, sitting across from me for the prospect, I would pull up my 40-something woman with kids testimonial and then tell her story and her journey. Okay. And that always just made that connect. They're like, oh, if she can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah. One thing I was going to ask you is details. How far do you go? When does it become too much information? Kind of where is that line that we need to watch? Because it's tough. We need to share some details, like the gray 1985 BMW, but then there may be more personal things that we need to really stay away from.
Yeah. Well, there doesn't have to be a line. Right. So it's all in what you're trying to get across in the story, and what you want the audience to feel, and how that's going to serve the audience to the best. Right. So if you go through and I'm just making this up, but go through and talking about the 3 days you spent in jail and or whatever, right. Or you got that DUI and blah blah blah, and it has no impact, right, unless you put some unless you're an attorney that gets people off from DUIs, then it doesn't have any impact at all.
Or you're a bail bondsman.
Yeah, right. So I've had clients that talk about their suicide attempts, that talk about. I had one client that was a bodybuilder, or fairly well known in the strength industry, and she was saying, I don't know if I want to talk about my steroid use. And I was like, I think you definitely need to, because it's something that obviously she wasn't doing now, but felt bad about, and wanted to kind of and go through that whole transformation. I think I was like, no, that I think we need to really lean into that. So it's case by case, but if you're just doing a shock for shock's sake, then it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think the relative part is kind of the key word there. And the only reason I ask is I had a very specific situation. I was sitting down, I was the prospect, and the lady was, for some reason, she just opened up with her divorce, how bad her husband was to her, how it took getting away. I mean, it was this bizarre story that did, it was like, I hated it for her, but it didn't have anything to do with the product or the service we were trying to talk about. So it was kind of off-putting, because I just felt it was like a sympathy play, that was what she had learned is, let's get the sympathy vote. And anyway, so I felt bad for her after this whole thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just told me all that, because I didn't need to know it, didn't really want to know it, and had nothing to do, with me trying to get out of there as fast as I possibly could. But
she was trying to get the commit, get you, like you said, the guilt trip about, I need this commission because now,
exactly.
It's so bad.
One thing too, when we're talking, maybe it works in a big room too, but I've been told for when we're in that sales situation, that instead of saying, "Hey Tom, let me tell you something," because that is kind of a inferior, superior type of relationship. But the key term was, "Let me share something with you," and it's such
Yeah.
an easy turn of a phrase, but it's just not something a lot of people think about.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, you want to, and that's where the word smithing comes in when
Yeah.
we're going through the story and the presentation and in the sales pitch,
Right.
is because words matter, but what really matters more is how you say stuff
Yeah.
versus what you say.
Yeah.
So that's more of the emphasis that I go through. But I mean, there's some phrases like that yeah, definitely bring you down a notch, and you definitely want to be in the position when in the sales situation,
Right.
whether on stage or one-on-one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's so. I think, like you said too, when we're in that one-on-one listening, we want to get our story out. We want to listen, but sometimes we could talk ourselves out of a sale because I've listened to I've I've kind of monitored. It was a sales presentation. I was just listening to the recording of, but it's like, okay, I've got this story I've memorized, or I've got this presentation, that contains my story and all this. And so we get started, and like maybe it's 6 minutes long, and within a minute or 2 minutes, the people are like, "Oh man, that sounds good." Okay, well,
Hmm.
hang on just a second. Let me keep telling. And then in this one instance, there were like 3 or 4 stop signs that this salesperson they just kept going through, because it's like, I got 6,000 words here. I've got to get out before you can tell, before you could tell me you're ready to buy. And these people are
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that sounds great. We want to really, how do we sign up?" Well, let me just go ahead and tell you a little bit more. And I'm holding my
Uh,
breath through this whole thing. Like, okay, they're going to say, by the time you get through, they're going to say, "Okay, forget it. We've tried."
yeah, yeah. No, you brought up a really great point. And that's like when I'm coaching salespeople, like I'll be listening to their calls, and I had a couple that this the thought process was, I need to ask all of these questions,
Yeah.
and the prospect was like, "Oh yeah, sounds good, sounds good," and then, "Oh well, let me ask you another question." Okay, oh no, that's. I was like, close the sale, take the money.
Right.
It's like,
Exactly.
what are you waiting for?
Right.
Like all these other questions, they aren't serving you,
Yeah.
and they aren't serving the prospect. You've already convinced them, or they've convinced themselves, more likely,
Yeah.
that your solution is the solution that they want. So sign them up.
Yep, yep. Because it's a real true danger of talking yourself out of a sale, and people think that's a joke, but I've actually
Mm-mm.
seen it before. I've seen it where somebody was ready to sign up, and they just kept on talking till the people were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, no thanks."
Well, and then I've done it myself, and it comes down to that you're going into, most likely the people are going into more of the features of what they're going to give to
Right.
the prospect, rather than focusing on the benefit of the program to the prospect. And when you go through the features, like, this is typical in car sales. Like, oh, it's in a car, and like, oh, it's got a V8, it's got this, it's that. I'm like,
Right.
does it have an engine, and does it go? Like, that's what
Oh,
does it look cool?
yeah.
That's what I care about when buying a car. I don't
Yeah.
care what the gas mileage, you have to fit the presentation to the prospect
Yeah.
and where they're at, and focus on the benefits
Yeah.
versus the features. And when you get too technical, that's where you lose people.
Yeah. And that's like this is where I think we have to listen and start where our prospect is, because I had a car dealer that I've been with, for, I don't know, 10, 15 years or more. And I told the lady when we first started, I said, "Look, I'm not your typical consumer. I don't need to smell it, to set in it, to feel it. I'm not going to fall in love with it. I'm like you. It's got, protection where I'm not getting wet where I'm driving. It's got 4 wheels, and it moves, forward and backwards, turns left and right. That's all I need. And I don't care if it's gray, green, red, blue, whatever you've got that has all the, the options that I want. But she listened, and she never tried to, kind of force me down that path. And she made a customer for, like I said, for about the last 12 years. We've done, I don't know, 5 or 6 car deals together because she listened to what I needed as the customer, prospect, whatever.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, we give car salespeople a kind of a bad rep sometimes, but I think they're coming up.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, there's one dealer, I was buying a BMW, and I go in and I was like, well, I want, this blue BMW 325, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, that's good. But I've got this red 328. It's got more power. Are you opposed to more power? It's like, done. Because I like to drive fast. And I think he realized that when I walked in, he was like, yeah, we're not going to put you in a 325. You've got to have the 328.
All right. Yeah. Oh, I know we're running long on time. One more question, and we'll start a wrap up. But pauses. People, speakers. Let me say, speakers can be very scared of pauses, and we can use them to our benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's the power of the pause.
Yeah.
And that's one of the very first lessons that I learned in sales is to shut up.
Yeah.
So the moment that and for for storytelling as well, it's good for dramatic impact as well. Mm-hmm. Because at some if you're going into a heavy story, you got to give the audience a little time to catch up and kind of process their emotions. So having a pause, and typically that's when I have the speaker move, is we don't walk and talk at the same time. That's kind of my rule. So you lay down something, give the audience time to kind of adapt to that, and then you're moving on stage. Yeah. And then in the sales situation, like one-on-one, the moment that I asked the close, I was like, okay, well, great. Did you want to put that on a Visa or MasterCard?
Yeah.
And the old saying, the first person that speaks is buying. You're either buying their excuse or they're buying your program.
Right. Yeah, that's what we always said. The first one that speaks is the loser. Because
yeah, well, hopefully nobody loses.
Well, yeah. Well, the old well, I even forgot where I was going with that. But anyway, yeah, that again, it just gets back to, give them a chance to process this and, see what the answer is. We can always come back and address objections if they say no, or I've got this question. But if we're like, credit card or debit, and then, we have the pause, but yet we just keep jumping right in. We don't give them a chance to really process this and give us the answer. Again, we'll end up talking ourselves probably out of a sale.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't know what that person is thinking in their head either. Because I had one of my very first sales when I learned the power of kind of asking questions, consultations. And I sat, this lady down and, went through the whole presentation. And at the end, I was like, based on what your goals are, you really need our 100 session program. And that's $5,200. And granted, I'd only sold like 10 session packages worth like $600 before. And now to go to 100, I was so nervous. I was just like, okay, my coach told me to shut up, Tom. And then the lady was just kind of sitting there and kind of looking. And I was like, oh, she's not going to go for it. She's not. I should offer her 50 sessions. No, I should just do a free session for her. And this is what my thought process was. And she was just kind of sitting there. It probably went on for a minute. And my head is just spinning. It's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to lose the sale. Blah. And then she goes, okay, yeah, I'll put that on my MasterCard.
Yeah.
I was like, are you sure?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you really mean that?
I was like, how do I charge $5,200? I've never done that before.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is a lot of times people will be like that. You want to do the 100, and then instead of giving them that minute to think about it and process it, it's like the very next thing is I'll discount that 20% for you if we just like jump right to the discount. And I always say if we run specials or things like that, that's one thing, but we should never discount the value of our service. It needs to be priced right, because there's also this reverse psychology in that if you come back to me and say, I really need 20% off or this, or I don't want, whatever the features may be, sometimes it's just as beneficial to say, you know what, my service may just not be right for you. And
Yep.
I would rather part friends and have you come back to me when it is right. And
Yeah.
you'll be surprised. Well, you wouldn't be, but some, people that don't do this every day would be surprised how now they're trying to sell you on why they should be your customer.
Yep. Oh yeah. I mean, that's the takeaway, right? So when you take something away from people, they want it even more.
Exactly.
And that's powerful. And I do that all the time. I probably should stop doing the whole, well, what kind of discount can you give me? But I like a discount.
Yeah.
I like to test the salespeople. And I gotta tell you, I have so much more respect for people that say, no, there is no discount. And the car, the BMW that I bought, and this was like 10 years ago. I was like, oh, go ahead and knock off like 2,000. He was like, nope, not, because if you don't buy it, somebody else will.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, damn. I was like, I was like, okay, fine.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, everybody kind of wants a deal, I think. But if you're showing tremendous value, then they'll accept your price.
Yeah. Because that's where I always tell people is, we want to sell from a place of value. If you're, well, again, this is my opinion. If we're trying to be a price leader, there's always going to be somebody that's going to come in below us. It never fails. But what we want to do is we want to sell on value. Why am I may be higher than the next guy, but this is the value that I bring to the table, my experience, the quality, whatever that value proposition is.
Yeah. And it's really the value that the prospect is going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And that's where the focus needs to lie is, yeah, you're gonna benefit this way, and this way, and that's why it's valuable.
Yeah, because from my point of view, I have paid more for a product or service because I like the guy and we had this trust. It's like I felt like the service or maybe the service after the sale, if it was a product or whatever. And I paid more money, and I know I did, but it's because I valued the relationship with that salesperson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's why you can't stress enough, do your homework, listen. And if you do the process right, not a lot of times, more than not, you won't get beat down on price. They'll buy the value.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Tom, again, like I said, I apologize. We're way long.
No worries.
But
I think it was my fault. I like to talk.
No, me too. No, this is so exciting. I don't get, a lot of people want to talk sales on here. And so the storytelling and the sales, such a great combination. But I appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us. Before we go, a couple things. First off, do you have a habit or a tool, something that you use every day that you feel adds a lot of value, personally or professionally?
Yeah, so the habit that I do on a regular basis is just I write in a journal every morning, kind of and it may sound weird or woo woo, but kind of the gratitude journal. So, and that I do that in the morning because that sets my day off to be really good. And I think a lot of people, myself included, wake up with a lot of like negative self-talk.
Yeah.
And by doing what I'm grateful for in my life, it just snaps it out and sets the day off right.
No, that's perfect. And there's an old adage that are you going to have a good day or a bad day? And the answer is yes. It's whatever you
Yes.
whatever you believe that you're going to have. You can make that come true.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
that's awesome. All right, Tom. Tell everybody, how can they reach out, get a hold of you? Who do you like to work with? How can you help them?
Yeah, so it's definitely for the storytelling. People are interested in learning that whole process. I actually have a little free gift. So it's the process of taking your own personal story and putting that into the hero's journey.
Okay.
So I have a little download PDF that I'd love to give to folks.
Okay.
And that's on my website, tomjacobs.com/storybook. And it's JACKOBS. So tomjacobs.com/storybook. You can download that and learn a little bit more about, and not only just learn, but actually put their story together
Yeah.
in there as well.
Okay. Great. Yeah, and we'll include all of that on the in the show notes as well, so they can reach out and get a hold of you.
Great.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much again. We appreciate it. And y'all reach out to Tom. Let him help you learn how to tell a good story. It will definitely change your life in both the marketing and the sales part. There's just, don't think you can find anything that beats a good story when you're trying to, trying to get somebody to do business with you for sure.
Yeah. Thanks,
All
Roy.
right. Hey, you bet.
Appreciate it.
So that's going to do it for another episode of the Business of Business podcast. Of course, I am your host, Roy. We can be found at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We are on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you listen to, if you'll reach out, I'd be glad to add that for you. Make it easier for you to listen. Also, we're on all the major social media platforms. Probably hang out on Instagram a little more than others, so reach out there. We'd be glad to interact with you. Also, a video of this interview will go up on our YouTube channel, so go check that out as well as some of our other episodes. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.